Greetings, everyone, and welcome to week 2 of Bioethics, Philosophy 320. Last week, if you recall, we discussed the difference between consequentialism and deontology. The deontologists and consequentialists are very different in many respects, and we're going to see those differences play out in real time as we talk about forced organ donation. So let's get started. The first question is whether or not forced organ donation is ever justified. And by donation, we don't mean freely giving one's organs, but rather the transferring of organs from one body to another. And often this is done, as people realize, to save lives. Often, in many countries like the United States and France, and your driver's license and various other things, you can register and decide whether or not you want to donate organs to people who need them. And that's because there's often a shortage of organs available for those in need. This is a common theme on a lot of television shows, but it's also true in real life. There simply aren't enough organs like livers, kidneys, and hearts to go around for people who need them. So the first point is that there's often a shortage of organs available for those in need. And the second is that some people could easily donate an organ, but choose not to for bad reasons, perhaps. So you could obviously, for example, register to be an organ donor in the event of your death. And some people might just be reticent to donate their organs upon death, or they may fear that the organs will be taken from them forcefully rather than saving their son, rather than a medical official or doctor or whatnot saving their lives. So we can see why there's at least a need for organ donation. And then the question would be whether or not forced organ donation would be morally acceptable. The reading this week, The Survival Lottery by John Harris, is a short piece designed in a very roundabout way to try and convince you, using consequentialist reasoning, that forced organ donation is the way to go. And he calls this a survival lottery. So you're a part of a system where whenever you need an organ, you can acquire one, along with others who need distinct organs, by going to the survival lottery, a place where everyone is assigned a number, chosen at random, and the person is killed and their organs are harvested. So this is the sort of lottery that perhaps you don't want to win, and by win I may lose. So this lottery both hurts the people who get randomly picked to be harvested, but it definitely helps people who need organs by making those organs available. And we can imagine this hypothetical survival lottery would be arranged or designed such that people killed whose organs are taken are done in such a way that we maximize these people. So we find people who are maximally compatible with others in need. We kill those people and harvest their organs, so those organs can be distributed among the greatest number of people possible. But for this lottery to work, as we will see, you really only need a 2-to-1 ratio. That is, from a consequentialist point of view, you really only need to save 2 lives for every life you take. So for every person killed whose organs are harvested, you really only need to end up saving 2 people with those organs in order for this survival lottery to make sense on consequentialist grounds. So overall, the idea would be that by using organs from one person to save multiple lives, you can ensure that fewer people die from killing with a lottery than from lack of organs. So we're trying to tamp down, as consequentials, we're trying to bring down the number of people who die from lack of organs, even if some people still have to die for those organs to be made available. So that's sort of the trade-off we're looking at. And from a consequentialist point of view, we care about maximizing goodness and minimizing badness compared to the alternatives. And then the alternative would be people just don't get organs. We're going to see later on in the class, or last week, we're going to talk about markets in blood plasma, but a lot of what we talk about in that class is going to apply to people selling their organs too. And so there may be a third option here between, on the one hand, just a shortage of organs, and on the other, a survival lottery where people are killed for their organs to save more lives overall. There may be a third alternative, which is paying people for their organs. So, but that's for week 8. We'll get to that down the road. So imagine a situation where the organ transplant procedure is medically perfect, which means if you're going to be killed and your organs are going to be harvested, you're not going to die on the operating table. There's not going to be doctor mistakes. We might assume, for example, that perhaps the doctor is assisted by some sort of AI, or it's a robot surgeon that doesn't make mistakes. And so we can imagine this is a medically perfect procedure. Now, of course, in the real world, that's not going to be the case. But what we're doing now is not exploring policy proposals. We are thinking about the morality of a possible proposal. So what we're doing this week is not actually thinking whether or not we should implement a survival lottery in a very serious way. For example, a letter writing campaign to your state officials, or trying to amend the Constitution to allow this sort of thing to happen legally. So this isn't a legal or policy question, it's a moral one. So for the sake of evaluating the morality of it, we are going to assume the organ transplant procedure is medically perfect. That's A. So B is that there's no difference between killing and letting die. This one is controversial, and this one is much more difficult to defend. Although Harris, the author of the article from this week, is going to try to defend the difference. So you might imagine, on the one hand, there's a difference between letting somebody, say, starve to death. You have food, you could give this person food, but they die from lack of food. Now, you didn't kill them, you let them die. So you might think that's bad, but you might think it's even worse to actively take their life. Like, perhaps you give them food, but you poison the food. So in that case, instead of letting this person die, you'd be actively killing them. And some moral philosophers think there is a difference between killing and letting die. Others think there isn't. Harris is in the latter camp. That is, he thinks there isn't much of a difference between killing and letting die, insofar as the end result is the same. We have someone who's dead. So Harris thinks that if you grant those 2 points, that we should adopt the survival lottery. Like, morally speaking, we have moral reasons to have a survival lottery, and really to force people to participate. Because if you were, I mean, theoretically, if you were to implement a survival lottery in a society, even if a lot of people were in favor of it because it would save lives in the aggregate, it wouldn't translate to full support. Very few policies do. So there would be some people in society that would have to be forced to go along with this. So that would be, that's why I say it's forced organ donation, because even if the policy works out morally, there's a lot of things that are morally sound that in a democracy you're not going to convince everyone to participate in. That is just true regardless of whether you're on the political left, the political right, somewhere in the middle, Democrat, Republican, moderate, independent, communist, socialist, libertarian, Green Party. It doesn't really matter what United States, Europe, South Korea, India, right? It doesn't matter what democracy you're in. You're going to find that even if there are morally good reasons to do something, not everyone's going to go along with it. So there's some extent to which we're going to have to create, or if this system is going to be implemented, so to speak, we're not thinking about it that way, but if it were, it'd be forced. So anyway, getting back to Harris. Harris thinks that A, if you have a medically perfect transplant procedures, and B, there's no difference between killing and letting die, then really you have all the reason you need for a survival, to implement a survival lottery, morally speaking. I'm not talking policy, we're not talking politics, economics, any of that stuff. Okay, so why does he say that? His conclusion is based on a few assumptions. So Harris assumes that each life, killed or allowed to die naturally, is of equal value. And there's a sort of egalitarian, liberal egalitarianness to this. And I mean liberal, I mean in the broad sense of the term liberal. I mean something like, civil rights, civil liberties, presumption of innocence, habeas corpus, the idea that before the court or before the law, that everyone should be treated equally. And that's sort of what Harris is getting at, but in moral terms, that each life is interchangeable with every other life in terms of its moral worth. Now, this is in some ways controversial. It depends on what you mean by equal value. You might think, for example, that the life of Hitler versus the life of a baby, to give an extreme example, is not one where we find equal value. I don't think Harris means it in that sense, though. Perhaps he means it in the sense that we are all humans and there's nothing really morally special about any of us as humans, divorcing that from the actions we've taken in the past. So this is an assumption you may or may not buy, but it's one that's needed for the moral permissibility of the survival lottery. So we sort of need this assumption. Each life, in other words, that morally speaking, they're interchangeable. So I swap you out for somebody else. There's no loss of moral value there because everybody's equal. Second assumption, number two. Two lives are of more value than one life killed to save them. So if everything's of equal value, if I have a stack of $1 bills and they're interchangeable in terms of value, right? They're each worth $1, which would mean that two of those dollars is worth more than one of those dollars, right? Two versus one. And he thinks that applies to lives. If they're equal value, if you could save two lives at the cost of one, the math would work out, morally speaking. You would end up saving two lives at the cost of one life. That's like saving $2 at the cost of $1, making $2 at the cost of $1. There's more value there. And you also have to, of course, assume that lives saved by organ transplant would have more life quality than that of a life taken. So in other words, Harris is talking about cases of the survival lottery, and it's something he talks about in the article, but I really want to make sure we emphasize this in the lecture, that Harris is talking about lives, quality of life saved of being of equal value. He doesn't mean something like we kill a 20-year-old, a healthy 20-year-old, and end up saving two 80-year-old people who are about to die from cancer anyway. So the idea there would be the amount of the quality of the life of each individual would be comparable. So if I'm harvesting organs from an innocent 20-year-old, then the people that are getting those organs are going to have, on average or in aggregate, like in taken together, are going to have way more quality of life years. So those are the number of years where you're relatively happy and healthy. John Harris does not think you should devote the survival lottery to saving lives, that are unhealthy or very short-lived. So it's important to keep that in mind. And then finally, that organ recipients would live relatively long and normal lives. This is important insofar as, like I said, you don't want to sacrifice healthy people to save the life of people who are very unhealthy or have short-lived lives. That's going to defeat the whole purpose of the survival lottery. The whole point of the survival lottery is to make things better for people overall, and it's antithetical to that, to save a bunch of poor people, or not poor people, excuse me, to save a bunch of sick people at the expense of healthy people. So, I mean, another way to think about this would be in terms of a lifeboat, right? So if you had two seats, three little kids, small children, presumably relatively healthy, they have most of their lives ahead of them. Harris would say, hey, look, to the extent that we can maximize the number of children saved, we should do that. So the boat would sink with 3 children on it, but it wouldn't with 2. So it's best to sacrifice 1 to save 2. because they're all kids, they're all young, they're all relatively healthy. So they're interchangeable, morally speaking, in terms of quality of life and years ahead of them. So we should, rather than put all three children in the life raft and sink it, or it's a pretty rinky dink life raft. Rather than do that, what we should do is say pick two to save and get rid of one. That way you'll at least maximize the number of lives saved. So it's kind of similar. So why should we accept these assumptions? All right, there's 4 assumptions. They're all key to Harris's argument. And if you don't accept all 4 of them, it's not clear the survival lottery makes moral sense. Harris tries to motivate this with a thought experiment. So he starts with this idea that there are these 2 people, person Y and person Z. Y needs a new heart and Z needs new lungs. But there's no organs available. People aren't donating organs, or they're not. There haven't been any recent deaths lately with people with compatible organs. Whatever it is, there's just no organs available for Y and Z. So Y and Z propose killing a single healthy patient and then harvesting their organs to save 2 lives. So if we kill this person X and they're single and healthy, harvest their heart and lungs, which we'll assume are compatible with Y and Z, then we can save 2 lives, namely the life of Y and the life of Z. Now, many people feel it wrong to kill an innocent person to save 2 people. All right, and you can see here this clash between consequentialism on the one hand and deontology on the other, like we talked about last week. So it shouldn't be shocking that some people are going to have consequentialist intuitions. There's going to be some people who think, well, yeah, of course we should sacrifice X, this single healthy person, and use their organs to save 2 people. All right, if they're all equal, then we get 2 for 1. All right, otherwise we're going to lose these 2. We're going to lose Y and Z. Other people think, no, to kill X who's healthy to save Y and Z would be to violate the rights of X, right? It's morally wrong to murder somebody, even if in so doing you get to save the lives of 2 people for one who's murdered. There's just some things that it doesn't matter how much the consequences add up in the right direction or stack up correctly. It doesn't matter how much happiness we can promote and suffering we can mitigate or minimize. You're still doing something wrong when you violate the rights of people to live and thrive, the rights of people to move freely, and you have a duty. You're morally obligated not to do those things. Now, this makes sense to the extent that there's no moral difference, or there is a moral difference between killing and letting die. So if on the one hand, it's morally wrong to kill X, to take their organs and save Y and Z, that would be worse if killing were worse than letting die. If killing were the same thing as letting die, then either killing X to save Y and Z, or allowing Z and Y to die from lack of organs, the killing versus the letting die wouldn't make much difference morally. It wouldn't matter. So if you think there's no difference between either on the one hand ending someone's life by killing them, or on the other allowing someone's life to end, letting them die, well, then you can see if there's no difference between those 2 things morally speaking, it wouldn't really matter whether we kill X or we allow we allow Y and Z to die, because killing and letting die are the same, right? They're morally on par. So we can see that. So really, this reaction to this proposal by Y and Z to kill a single healthy patient, harvest their organs, and save 2 lives is only objectionable insofar as there's a difference between killing and letting die. Killing is worse than letting die. But the question is, really, is it? Harris thinks no. Some philosophers think yes. And it's important in philosophy, regardless of what your opinion is, that you can back up your opinion with reasons. It's not so much important for our philosophy classes what you believe, whether you agree with your professor or not, to the extent that you know what the professor thinks, which good professors in philosophy typically don't divulge what they think, but only insofar as it doesn't really matter what you think. It matters why you think it in philosophy, right? So some philosophers think there's a difference between a different moral difference between killing and letting die, and others think there really is no difference; they're equivalent. Okay. So what is a response here? Y and X, or excuse me, Y and Z have a response. This is something Harris points out in his article on their behalf. But really, if you think about the end result, if you think about either killing X to save Y and Z, or you think about letting Y and Z die from lack of organs, the end result is the same. It's surely is shooting them. So if I'm a doctor and I go to Y and Z's hospital room, and I say, well, I can't kill X to save you. It would be wrong. I'd be killing someone innocent, and I can't bring myself to end somebody's life. Y and Z could say something like, hey, look, your inaction, that is your refusal to kill X to sacrifice, to get their organs for us, that refusal is as certain to kill us as if you just shot us with a gun. If we would be, if the doctor would be responsible so the doctor's inactions would be sure to kill Y and Z just as surely as if the doctor had shot them. So whether the doctor takes an action or refuses to take an action, the result's going to be the same. Y and Z are going to die. We know this. This is why they need organs. This is why Y needs a heart and Z needs lungs. And without that heart and lungs, they will die. Those are essential organs. They're essential to probably the heart, lungs, and digestive system are about as basic and essential to any organism as one can imagine, or at least complicated or advanced organisms anyway. So those things are really basic and they're really important. And if you don't supply them to the Y and Z will die. Why does it matter whether or not my action is what the doctor's action resulted in someone's death, or the doctor's inaction resulted in someone's death? The end result is the same. If the doctor would be responsible for their death in the shooting case, so if the doctor just walked in and shot Y and Z, surely the doctor would be responsible for the death. Then aren't they just as responsible for letting Y and Z die? It's not clear what the difference is. Why does it matter? And Harris in his article really pushes this point. Right? He really presses the point about how it doesn't seem to matter really, and the result's the same. So whether it's letting die or killing, the person's going to die regardless. It's certain. It's a given. And there's another response here. So you might think really what this boils down to is fairness. The person killed for their organs is innocent. So if the doctor were to kill X, take those organs and use those to save the lives of Y and Z, the doctor has killed X, who's innocent. In fact, that's part of what makes it murder, part of why we think in a sort of folk everyday sense, or an ordinary sense, that why murder is wrong has a lot to do with the fact that the person killed is innocent. That's part of what makes it murder. If I were to kill somebody in self-defense, if you were to kill somebody in self-defense, that wouldn't be murder. It'd be killing. But most philosophers don't think that's murder. They think, well, you're killing in self-defense. You're not the one that initiated violence. So that's a killing, but it's not a murder. Here, this looks like it would be a murder insofar as killing X would be wrong because X is innocent. X hasn't done anything to deserve being killed. They're not being violent to other people. They're not a danger to other people. Now, their organs could be used to save lives, but that doesn't mean that they are. That doesn't mean that they're deserving of death. Now, of course, as Harris rightly points out, if you think about innocence, as a reason to not let someone get killed or not to kill somebody, then why isn't innocence a reason not to let somebody die? So Y and Z did nothing to deserve death either. They were the unlucky ones who happen to have diseased organs that need to be replaced. So we think the reason it would be wrong to kill X and take their organs to save Y and Z is because X is innocent. Harris can point out, hey, look, the end result is the same. Whether you kill X or you let Y and Z die, the result is the same, which is somebody's death. So really, in a sense, what exactly is the difference? Right? It's going back to that distinction between killing and letting die. If there's no distinction between killing and letting die, then killing X, not killing X because they're innocent, is just as much a reason to not kill X as it is to not let Y and Z die. Let me say that again. If there's no difference between killing and letting die, it would be just as wrong to kill X because they're innocent as it would be to let Y and Z die because they're innocent. And since from a consequentialist point of view, we can do more good by killing X and saving Y and Z, then that'd be a reason to kill X to save Y and Z. What is, if it would be wrong to kill X and it'd be wrong to let Y and Z die, what is the tiebreaker here? Right? We can't do both. It's one or the other at most. And we have to do something. Harris says, well, the tiebreaker is numbers. The tiebreaker is numbers. If you kill, if you let X, or excuse me, if you let Y and Z die, you've let two people die. And if you kill X, one person died. And since there's no difference, he thinks, between killing and letting die, it's twice as bad to let Y and Z die as it is to kill X. So we should kill X, take X's organs, and use those to save Y and Z. This is according to Harris. Now, you might think like, look, part of the problem here is if you play this out, if you give people power to decide life and death matters, and this is true of governments, it's true of hospitals, it's true of doctors and experts, it's true of kings and queens, it's true of CEOs. It's true of anyone that you give power to, there's a potential for abuse, right? There's a potential that this individual will abuse their power. It would place too much power in the hands of doctors, right? If doctors should just kill people whenever they need organs, even to save lives, it would terrify their patients, right? And it would put doctors in a position where they could abuse the power. And no one would go near doctors anymore. I mean, can you imagine, even if Harris's reasoning, John Harris's reasoning is correct, and killing and letting die are equally bad. So therefore you should kill X to save Y and Z because you end up saving more people. That wouldn't last long, presumably, at least in a society like ours, with press and democracy and freedom of speech and freedom to protest, with a judicial system. It wouldn't last very long. And I'm not talking for legal reasons, I'm talking for cultural reasons. People would just, the news would get out, people wouldn't go near hospitals and doctors anymore. Why would you? Right? You just get killed and your organs taken for no apparent reason. And the doctors could abuse their power. There's just all kinds of ways in which it seems like, even morally speaking, if this is right, even if there is no difference between killing and letting die, and Harris has got a point about that, there seem to be practical reasons why it's not going to work. However, according to Harris, Y and Z have a solution to this problem. They propose a lottery system. So the idea would be whenever two or more people need organs and there aren't any available through natural death, a computer will randomly choose a healthy patient to kill to save multiple lives. Now, Harris is quick to point out in the article that there are certain people and certain patients who just wouldn't qualify for the lottery. So you might imagine a smoker, lifelong smoker with lung cancer would be ineligible. Their doctor has warned them multiple times over and over again, stop smoking, it's bad for you. It causes lung cancer or other types of cancers, stop smoking, and they don't listen. Or someone who's a chronic alcoholic, someone who's got liver damage, they drink way too much. Someone like that also wouldn't be would not be eligible, presumably, for, at least in Harris's view, in Harris's article, wouldn't be eligible to be part of the lottery system. But that's why Harris thinks a lottery system would do the best job of solving this problem. It would be random, it would be efficient, it would end up saving more lives overall. And in fact, he thinks if you had a system like this in place, and like I said, we're not talking about like passing some law or amending the Constitution or something, but morally speaking, if you had something like this system in place where people could get organs they needed from a survival lottery, you would save a lot of lives, number one. And number two, the odds that you would be killed and your organ, the odds that you would be killed and your organs would be harvested, despite you being innocent and healthy, are much, much lower than you being in a car accident. And as Harris points out in this article, the possibility of a car accident doesn't seem to stop most people from driving around their cars. And since it would be, less likely that you would be killed in a survival lottery and have your organs harvested, and you'd be more likely to get organs if you needed them down the road, and it would be safer. You're less likely to get killed and your organs harvested than to die in a car accident, and well, doesn't stop most people from driving. It doesn't seem like there's all that reason to be afraid of the survival lottery. Now, the question, of course, for this week is, do you agree with Harris? Does Harris have a point? Is he being too much of a consequentialist about this? What would a deontologist say? It's important to think about these questions. In fact, that's kind of the whole point of this exercise, especially as it relates to the deontology and consequentialism we talked about last week, right? Those moral theories, and thinking of these issues through those lenses. So the assignment for this week, as well as your discussion post assignment, of course, is to think about what a deontologist and consequentialist would say, and what sorts of objections, if any, do you have to the survival lottery. It's important to think about this for both the midterm and the final, and give it some thought. It's an interesting question. It's an interesting proposal, and it's something that's something we're thinking about. Next week, we are going to cover something along the lines of, let me stop. Next week, we're going to cover adoption and procreation. And we're also going to think about that in somewhat through consequentialists and deontological lines. Until next week.